The complaint reports a, quote, repeated abuse of an electronic record system designed to store classified, sensitive national security information, which the White House used to hide information of a political nature. This is a cover-up. This is a cover-up.
The whistleblower complaint says senior White House officials tried to lock down, in their words, records that were related to Trump's phone call with the president of Ukraine. What the House Speaker is now calling, as you heard her say, a cover-up. The whistleblower adds that the move, quote, underscored to me that White House officials understood the gravity of what had transpired in the call. The report describes how the call's transcript was placed into a standalone computer system managed by the National Security Council, quote, reserved for code word level intelligence information such as covert action. And that, quote, some officials voiced concerns internally that this would be an abuse of the system and was not consistent with the responsibilities of the Directorate for Intelligence Programs. The complaint goes on to say this was not the first time under this administration that a presidential transcript was placed into this code word level system solely for the purpose of protecting politically sensitive rather than national security sensitive information. This is a lot to discuss and a really important point. Still with us, Jeremy Bash, Susan Page, Matt Zapotosky, and Peter Baker. So, Jeremy, in the mid-'70s, it was all about recorded phone and office conversations. Welcome to the computer age. This gets squirreled away. The implied promise that there may be more like it. To ask a blunt question nicely, are you going to rely on the patriotism and rigor and diligence of people who are drawn to working in the NSC realm, that they will be honest brokers, go back, respond perhaps to subpoenas, and find what else there is?
Some of them might. We just don't know yet. But I think the way to translate all of this into English is that when senior White House officials realized what had gone on during this July 25th phone call and actually reread the near verbatim notes or transcript, many of them said, ruh-roh, we got to clean up aisle 8. We have a serious problem on our hands. And because it wasn't the 70s and it wasn't recorded and so they couldn't destroy tapes, it also wasn't the 1980s when during the Reagan administration, during Iran-Contra, John Poindexter just threw the thing into the shredder machine, and Fawn Hall did as well down in Oliver North's office. They can't do that anymore. So what did they do? They took the document, which was marked secret, which is a fairly low level of classification, and they put it on the super uber sensitive classified network at the White House, which only a very few handful of individuals have access to, in effect shoving it in the desk drawer so that it would never see the light of day.
Along with the other sensitive secrets like plans we may have for foreign leaders and assets we may have placed in foreign capitals, correct? This was right up against some of the more vital secrets we keep.
That's right. For covert action programs, including things like the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound in Pakistan in 2011.
So, Matt, in addition to learning just now that ruh-roh is a term of art in national security, we learned today this was squirreled away for political reasons. That is a distinction with a big difference here. Walk the folks watching through exactly what that means.
Yeah, so my colleagues Josh Dawsey and Carol Leonnig have some reporting tonight that I think helps put that in context. This White House is very afraid, paranoid about leaks, and they're paranoid in particular about leaks of President Trump's phone calls with foreign leaders. He has experienced a couple of those with leaders from Australia and Mexico, and he doesn't like that. So one strategy they've used is just developing technical mechanisms to lock the information down or trace who has access to it, kind of create creating chain of custody records, making sure fewer people are in on these calls. And then in this case, apparently an egregious case, moving it to this super classified server where it doesn't belong. Now, things get classified, potentially overclassified all the time. That's a persistent problem in government. But what the whistleblower is alleging here is that just wasn't the case. And you can really see it when you read the transcript of that call. The things the president says, Rudy Giuliani has also said to any Ukrainian prosecutor who will listen. There is no real argument that this should be classified. So the conclusion is it was classified just to protect the president's political interest. And that is inappropriate. It's inappropriate to put something on a super classified server that's just meant to hide it from people and protect the president's political interest, because there was really no argument here that what was said on the call, at least from what we've seen, could be, legitimately classified.
Peter Baker, it is a real argument that foreign leaders will have what we love to call the chilling effect before their next heart-to-heart with this president, knowing there are listeners on our end and knowing the notes of that conversation, should they suddenly become important to a national issue, can be released. How do you think, having just come back from accompanying the president at his several day of UN visits, how do you think allies, adversaries are watching this chapter in the Trump presidency?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, there was, President Trump did have reason to be a little suspicious about transcripts or records of his calls coming out, even aside from whether he had committed some sort of an abuse in a conversation. Remember early on, of course, his phone conversation with the leaders of Mexico and Australia both leaked to the Washington Post. He obviously got upset about that. He's been particularly suspicious ever since. He's particularly suspicious about anybody having records of his conversations with Vladimir Putin. You'll remember at one point he told the interpreter after his first meeting with the Russian president to give him the notes and not tell anybody what had happened there. So there's no question that he had some cause for concern at the beginning, and it has a particular affinity for keeping his conversations quiet. He doesn't want them to be spread out around the government. But you're right, other leaders overseas are going to watch this with some degree of concern. The president of Ukraine is quoted in this transcript, this rough transcript reconstructed from notes, as saying some things that were disparaging about European leaders. He spent the last 24 hours, he and Ukrainian officials, trying to make up with the Europeans. They don't want to be isolated. The worst possible outcome for him is that he's alienated from the Trump administration because he's caused trouble in some way he hasn't really tried to, and he's alienated from his European allies, and he's left only facing Russia by himself. So there are real consequences to what's going on here in the real world beyond Washington.
A couple of things here. Apparently, since we've been on the air, we've learned that the count in the House has now gone up to 225. In the House, ball game is 218. That's where you get past the absolute math majority. So now 225 members of the House have made clear their preference for some sort of impeachment-related action. Susan Page, one of the other phrases from the mid-'70s, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. Talk about that tried and true phrase, and talk about the coming role in our national politics that the Speaker of the House will have.
Yeah. Sometimes truisms are true, and I think that is probably the case in this one. One of the problems that the president has is that the allegations are so simple to understand. He got on the phone with a foreign leader and said, please I'm going to encourage you to investigate my political rival. I think that strikes most Americans as the wrong thing to do. And there are allegations that they abused a national security system in order to hide the account of this telephone call from political exposure. I think that strikes most Americans as the wrong thing to do as well. And Mr. Trump's biggest problem is that the person who now owns impeachment is Nancy Pelosi, who is an enormously skilled legislative leader who has been very reluctant to go down this path before, who was persuaded only after members of her caucus who are in swing districts most at risk for political blowback from supporting impeachment came out and said this is the right thing to do. The indication we got from her today in her comments to reporters is that this is going to be controlled mostly by Adam Schiff, a committed chairman she trusts and is close to, and that she's going to keep it narrow and focused on Ukraine. Although I've got to say, I think the four most chilling words in the complaint that we read today were not the first time, quote, not the first time, meaning that there are other conversations with other world leaders that have been parked in this national security secret computer server that surely will now be the subject of great inquiry and interest by Congress.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.